One day, a man bit his lip out of being anxious. He felt that something was skeptical, and it turns out that he possessed a body of another person who is the young master of demon sect. But his real problem was, he possessed the weakest of the characters among all the trashy villains in the martial art novel that he wrote. The fictional character he possessed was named Hayek Ryonan, the disastrous young master. The protagonist sat in his bed as he thinks of a plan to get out, or how can he live inside the novel he wrote. The protagonist is Lee Seon. He started to bite his nails as his coping mechanism to calm him down. Lee Seon is a 32-year-old man who lives in South Korea. While being trapped in Ryonan's body, he wonders how an ordinary person could enter a martial arts novel written by the author himself. Seon then tried to recall before the incident happened. He was sure that there's definitely something strange before he teleported and possessed Ryonan's character. Back in Seon's home before the incident, he was just moving boxes to tidy up his place. He was a bit worn out. Seon just finished moving into his new house and decided to take a break after carrying all his things. He was surprised as he scrolls his phone to see a news about a famous person named Yoo So-ra. A famous actress was in a coma after an accident. That moment he was just busy reading the article when all of a sudden one of his boxes fell with a laptop in it. He saw the laptop open as it fell. He was a bit irritated to clean up again when he just started to rest for a while. He then saw a file that caught his eye. He was puzzled when the file automatically appeared named as a hero written by Lee Seon. He smiled to see the file with full of his past memories when he wrote the novel. He recalls those days to be the dark past of his life. As a Hero is the martial arts novel he wrote 10 years ago, and he couldn't believe that he hadn't deleted the file yet. He decided to read the incomplete novel he wrote when he was a college student. But then he saw something unfamiliar. He saw a message that states that Lee Seon has to go back to his novel. As he reads the message of the novel, the laptop glows so bright to open the portal, and Lee Seon was then sucked into the fictional world and became Ryonan. Seon didn't even got a chance to pick a character he aspired to be. He just woke up to be Ryonan. But he just thinks that it must be a good thing that he at least has Ryonan's memory in the novel. He sighs since he still got one of the worst characters. He then recalls Ryonan's personality to analyze. Ryonan is the fourth son of a demon sect leader. The reason why Ryonan was asleep before Seon possessed his body was because Ryonan was knocked out when the horse he rode fell backwards because it was frightened by a bug, so Ryonan lost conscious and woke up a month later. Seon tried to recall more memory, and that's when it hit him when he realized something about the character. Seon's head felt like it's gonna rip apart to see Ryonan's memory. He saw that Ryonan is a perverted womanizer, beats up homeless people for his fun, and bullies one of his soldiers by sitting on them while they train. Hayek Ryonan's life has kept gushing to Seon's mind and felt like his head is going to burst in a second. Seon realized how much of a bastard Ryonan was, who doesn't even have any role. Seon was so mad that Ryonan was trashier than he expected. But possessing one of the most jackass characters wasn't a problem for Seon. He remembered a scene from his book about Ryonan life that has come to an end. He remembered the scene where Ryonan's throat was slit by someone he was battling with. Seon was terrified since he'll soon will feel getting his throat slit. He panicked on the ground and kept screaming for the character's horrendous death. The reason for Ryonan's existence is to be killed by the main character in a slash and pave a way for the main character to become a hero. Seon became pale and panicked. He didn't even thought of staying in the novel. He just wanted to get out and return to his home before he gets killed by the main character. He immediately ponders for a plan. He remembered that fortunately, Ryonan is the young master of Demon Act. Even though Seon wrote him as a good-for-nothing fella, Ryonan has the status of a conglomerate or prince in modern terms. Ryonan has enough assets and subordinates, and by the looks of it, Seon thought that it's possible to find some information to go back his original world. He was so determined and desperate at the same time that he would do anything. He yelled like a maniac that he won't die because of the main character. He yelled that he will surely survive and go back home while his maids were startled by his loudness. Seon looked at the mirror again and mocked the character he made that Ryonan really looks disobedient. One of the problems Seon also realized is that Ryonan isn't just weak, but he is very weak among all the villains. He was then curious to try using Mugong, a combat technique in Murim. He did try using Mugong to see it for himself and stands on the ground as he concentrates. He felt the power flows in his body and remembered that Ryonan is a hereditary Mugong with a power named Heavenly Wave Sword. Seon went back concentrating. He felt the faint energy embracing his body. He then leans back to charge the power. He was in his finals position to make a sway. He then released the power Ryonan has as he jumped. Seon was astonished that the power actually works, but he had a cramp and yelled out of agony. He was on the ground and couldn't move because his body was locked. He yelled once again out of pain. He screamed for doctor or any physician, and all he could do was scream again and again. One of the maids rushes into Sion's room when she heard her master's calling. The maid was frightened to see her master laying on the ground. She thought her master was possessed by a demon and died while being stuck in the position Sion attempts earlier. Sion was knocked out while his eyes were wide opened. The maid screamed after witnessing her master, who looked so terrifying. Later that day, Sion got the medication he needed by being acupunctured. He lays on the bed while staring at the ceiling after his embarrassing accident. Sion clenched his fist for realizing that he almost died because of himself and not because of the main character. He also realized that he has a body that has not been adequately trained and that his muscles got twisted from using a high-level martial art. Sion was then mad at the character he wrote that how can a bastard like Rionan can't even use one move properly. While Sion lays on his bed to heal, he reminisced the bloodline and the origin of Rionan's family. Once, there was a man who uses a martial art technique called the Heavenly Chaotic Destruction Sword Technique, a technique exclusive to the Hayek Ryan family, a family that has produced the highest number of leaders of the demonic cult. It has not only been discontinued but also incredibly difficult to learn. A tremendous amount of inner Kai must be required for its execution, since the user also needs to have a deep comprehension of each move to use it properly. And for Rionan, that has always neglected his training and cherry-picked martial arts that could easily be learned. Rionan has never taken inner Kai training nor movement training seriously, so it's natural that the character he wrote was weak. And that's why someone like Hayek Rionan won't be able to use the martial art technique that Sion attempted to do earlier. Sion felt so unlucky that he possessed such weak body. After Sion's treatment, he was finally healed and walked out of the meditation room. He was so serious and didn't want to waste his time as he thought of a plan. Sion went to the library to do some research. He picked a couple of books, and some fell to the ground since he was in a rush to get out of the fictitious world. He searched the books to see some information that could help him, and by his surprise, he felt lucky that he could read Chinese characters. Sion sits in the library for a while to gain knowledge about the demonic cult. Sion then pictures every description in the book. He then reads that the people of the demonic cult don't denominate themselves by their name. They call themselves Divine Cult, and their exact name is Sun Moon Divine Cult. During the Yuan dynasty, the Sun Moon Divine Cult spread their name widely among the Han people who were suffering, settled in the Central Plains, and built their forces and aided Zhu Yuanzhang in breaking free from the grip of the Yuan dynasty. In the end, Zhu Yuanzhang overthrew the Yuan dynasty and founded the Ming dynasty. However, as he was afraid of the Sun Moon Divine Cult's power, he drove them out, driving the early days of his reign. Later, they settled down in Xinjiang, a place far away from the Central Plains. The remaining cult members barely managed to stay alive, until the third-generation cult leader, who harbored a deep hatred toward the Central Plains people for chasing them away, accumulated enough strength to return to the Central Plains. However, his dream of advancing into the Central Plains was thwarted every single time by the Miram Alliance and the Imperial Army. Hayek Ryan Moon, the 15th leader of the Sun Moon Divine Cult and Hayek Rionan's father, was first subjugated the western region before directing his entire force toward the Central Plains. Sion was nervous to realize the reason why Rionan will fight against the main character is for the main character to seek revenge, which was totally valid. Sion then remembered what will happen after the remaining day. In line with the upcoming Heavenly Demonic Festival, which will soon happen, Hayek Ryan Moon will announce his plan of advancing into the Central Plains and pick a successor. Sion already knew who the successor would be, while he felt the urge to punch himself since he is the one who wrote the novel. Sion then recalled what would happen after the Heavenly Demonic Festival. After the Heavenly Demonic Festival, the one who gets picked as the successor will send a vanguard team to the Central Plains. And Hayek Rionan, who was horribly defeated during the successors contest at that time, forced himself to join the vanguard team to make up for his mistake and goes to the Central Plains. But Rionan will make fun of the protagonist and dies in one hit. Sion now has the information he needed and counts his remaining days, and that would be 2 years left until the Heavenly Demonic Festival. In other words, Sion only has 2 years remaining before he gets killed by the main character. He stood up and immediately thinks of a way out to avoid the disaster and poor decision of Rionan in 2 years. He grabbed a paper and an ink brush. Sion decided to thoroughly examine the story he made by first writing down everything he can remember from his novel. Later then, an old man with a maid walked towards the library. The old man asked the maid if she was certain that their master called him. Both the maid and the old man felt odd that someone like Rionan is in the library. The maid then followed up some information like she's gossiping that she finds it weirder that right after their master woke up, which was Rionan Ak. Sion screamed for a long time in an incomprehensible language, and now he's been writing something for hours like he's taking his studies very seriously. The old were shocked, like what happened to their master was some sort of miracle. He was speechless for a moment, trying to picture their master to be somewhat decent. The old man then told the maid that she may go and never speak about Ryonan, who suddenly tries to study to everyone. The old man rushes, but he stopped and think how he will interact with Ryonan a Sion. He thought that maybe he wasn't fully recovered yet, and will he execute a plan if his master suddenly acts like a crazy dog again? As the old man came in, he saw Sion, who looks like he lost his mind. Sion tries to be polite as he greeted the old man, who he calls Elder Quan. Elder Quan felt disturbed by Sion's politeness. Elder Quan assumed that Sion went crazy while Sion stood up to get a chair. Elder Quan imagined a scenario that Ryonan grabs a chair to throw it at him. But to his surprise, Sion grabbed a chair for Elder Quan so he could sit down. Sion still tries to be polite while he wondered how much of a nut job did Ryonan must have been for Elder Quan being shocked by his gently speaking and kindness. Elder was curious if are there any problems since he was called by his master. Sion asked with a natural villainous face if Elder Quan is either in charge of taking care of him or taking care of his wallet. Elder, who's still in disbelief, answered that he's in charge of both. Sion started to compute his belongings if they were sold, but Elder Quan assumes that his master must be in trouble, and he offered that he'll deal with it. Sion was speechless while Elder Quan is waiting for his master to show a bratty behavior as usual. But Sion clears things up that he hasn't caused any problems whatsoever. Elder Quan asked that if his master isn't in trouble, then why would he suddenly ask how much money he owns? The Sion confidently answered that money is the ammo for getting shit done. But Elder Quan doesn't have any idea what ammo is since it wasn't invented yet. Sion told Elder Quan to just focus on the main point by just telling him how much money he owes. Elder Quan asked again to make sure his master doesn't use it on useless things. But Sion suddenly became a man of wisdom, replied that if someone dies and comes back to life, then at that point even they would start thinking just what have they been doing with their life until now. And why did they bother hoarding all those treasures when they can't use them in the afterlife? Elder Quan was terrified to see the person he knew all his life suddenly says something deep. Sion then ordered Elder Quan to hurry up and exchange everything for cold and hard cash. Elder Quan understood, but he's still terrified because his master acts like he has a bipolar disorder. Sion, with a bright and shiny aura, politely asked Elder Quan that he will leave the rest to him, and since there's a lot of work to do, he hopes to get to it right away. As Elder Quan stood up to leave, Sion gave him a reminder to remember to update the records of their finances and treasures and keep track of how much they'll get from selling each item. Elder Quan was so weirded out by how his master acts like he's a totally different person after he came back to life. Elder Quan was worried if Ryonan is alright in the head. A few days later, they finally collected all the money Ryonan owns. Sion was happy to see the gold, but he wasn't sure if the money was enough for him to implement his survival plan, though he still has 2 years to prepare for the Heavenly Demon Festival. He carries the scroll he wrote onto in the library the other day. He was fierce that he must survive not only for the character he possessed, which is Hayek Ryonan, but also for him, Lee Sion. He then proceeds to make a plan for 2 years. But first he started by being financially wise. If he converts Ryonan's wealth to a modern-day currency, then Ryonan will possess roughly 2 billion won. Sion thinks it's not that bad, but it would also not be enough. He tries to recall the flow of the story, that he will be safe for now, but the problem is, he remembered the main character is already in his redemption arc. The main character is probably somewhere in the woods, trying to be stronger by training every day. Sion scratched his head as he for writing the story, since at that moment a third-rate generic Miram story will begin. But Sion moves forward to proceed with his next plan. Sion went to the Heavenly Demon Library, where all the martial arts that the divine cult has amassed over the years are stored, and for Sion to do more research. The guards were stunned to see Sion being in front of the library. Sion looks motivated to gain knowledge about martial arts that will save his life. As Sion goes in, the guards were so shocked to see someone like Ryonan act. But Sion is interested in reading. As he observes the library, he notices that there are fewer books there than he imagined, but on a good note, it would only take him a little time to find the book he needs. He then starts to collect all the books he needs with joy in his face. He then found the life-saving meditation technique. According to the novel Sion wrote, the book he found will enhance a person's senses. It was exactly what Sion needed at that moment. According to the book, those who will learn the life-saving meditation technique will gain a super sixth sense. A person will be able to dodge attacks and take full advantage of happenings. Furthermore, when the martial art reaches the level of maturity, not only would a person even be able to sense their opponent's strength and emotional state, but they would also gain the ability to detect dangerous traps and ambushes. Sion thinks that the technique is a cheat skill, and for that moment, he was glad that he was the first one to learn the technique before the main character, since the main character will learn it in the middle of the story and becomes even more broken. After Sion reads the technique, that ought to raise his odds of survival significantly. But then he felt scared that if once the main character learned about the technique, then Sion would die for sure. But Sion noticed another book. He saw another book that gave him hope called The Scale Armor Technique and the 9 Moons Divine Art. He first read the Scale Armor Technique, and the book states that the technique increases one's defense to the point where one can even block a sword unarmored. And for the 9 Moons Divine Art, it will increase one's strength up to 9-fold. Sion became so cheerful after acquiring the martial arts books he needed. He then talks to his fate to bring it on while being confident that he will study. Later that evening, a group of men in the bar was having a feast with their hostess. A man wanted to inform Dan Pyong about the rumors he heard recently. But Dan Pyong already knew what he was about to say since the rumor was like a huge news for them. Dan Pyong thinks that there's something more absurd than their very own Hyuk Ryonan reviving from the dead. The man replied that Ryonan is still batshit crazy, but there seems to something different about Ryonan's craziness that time. Dan Pyong was curious. The man actually took a visit for Ryonan in the Western Villa, but then Ryonan's servant told him that he was busy and will call for him if he's free. But Dan Pyong still doesn't believe it since the Ryonan they knew was bratty and only busy with drinking and throwing a fit. The man says that it was exactly what he said in mind. But he checked Ryonan and he discovered it with his own eyes that Ryonan locked himself at the Heavenly Demon Library for days. Dan Pyong laughed hysterically to hear the news that a delinquent like Ryonan knows how to read. Dan Pyong then assumed that maybe Ryonan was thinking of quitting their Four Heavens gang and making a name for himself. But the man was dead serious since he made a conclusion. He was positive that maybe Ryonan was looking forward for the Battle of the Succession at the Heavenly Demon Festival. Dan Pyong sips his alcohol drink and spits it out for being shocked with Ryonan finally being serious. Dan Pyong loudly says that it must be a joke. Dan Pyong loudly dares and promised everyone that if Ryonan truly joins the Battle for Succession, then he will become his slave. They all had a laugh and told Dan Pyong to not eat his own words. Dan Pyong then laughs hysterically while the man who informed him about the rumor was still dead serious. The man seemed to be not underestimating Ryonan. Meanwhile, Sion was still in the library trying to study. His ear itches and assumes that maybe someone was trying to insult him. Sion is finally finished with his studies. He believes that it would be a lot easier if instead of trying to study on his own, it's better for him to have a teacher as well. He stood up and stretched after a long day of studying. Sion rushes outside when he realizes that he can just summon one if he needed a teacher. Elder Quan, on the other hand, was outside the library wandering around. The guards called Elder Quan after Sion went outside. Sion feels jolly with a paper in his hand that consists of a list of people. He then favors Elder Quan to call the people on the list he made immediately. Elder Quan wonders who those people could be. Sion responded with pride that the people he wrote down were his teachers. Elder Quan was confused, but Sion just politely told him to summon those people. Sion then reminded Elder Quan to guide the teachers to his training grounds, but Elder Quan calls it the trash heap since Ryonan never used it for training. Sion was stunned to hear that his personal training grounds is just where they throw their trash. Sion insults Ryonan in his mind for being so irresponsible. Sion then asked Elder Quan of how long would it take for the training grounds to be cleaned and ready for use. Elder Quan promised that he will immediately get it done so that Sion could use it the next day. Sion was glad that it was all settled. But as soon as Sion leaves, he smelled something stinky. He realized that he stank for locking himself up at the library for days. Later that evening, Sion finally relaxed in his hot bath. Then he saw two beautiful and sexy women in front of him who offers that they will help him get washed up. Sion became a gentleman and closes his eyes and rejects the offer. The girl asked Sion since he was chasing them out. But Sion tries so hard to keep his posture and still doesn't want to look at the naked ladies. He respectfully turned them down and asked them to leave. The two women was confused. Then Sion lost it and yells at the two women to just get out as he stood up with a boner. After he took a bath, Sion is in the office and told himself that he has no time to enjoy since his life is at stake. He repeatedly reminds himself that if he really wants to survive and return to the modern world, then he must stick with his firm plan. One of Sion's servants informed him that his teacher's secretary Jang Muryong has arrived. Sion looks bubbly and astonished to see his teacher Muryong, but on the other hand, Muryong was hella confused with him being summoned by the man who's known to be the craziest delinquent in the divine cult. Muryong hopes that Ryonan didn't put a dirt on him. Muryong analyzes the place as he tries to compare all the information he knew about Ryonan. Muryong heard that Ryonan is someone who likes to indulge in all sorts of lavish luxuries, but they can't even see one jewelry. He only saw books and documentations around. Sion then apologized for his messy room. Sion then stood up and bows his head as a sign of respect and told Muryong that he was looking for him personally, and he apologized that he called Muryong in his place instead. Muryong was startled to see Ryonan to be somewhat obedient, and instantly told Sion to raise his head and asked Sion about speaking so gently. He told Sion that he's being too polite and favors him to speak casually, or else he won't be able to handle his mental stress. Sion told him that he'll do what Marion will say. He then sits properly while staring at Marion. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Sion then explained himself about the reason why he called Marion in his place. Sion heard that Marion were very familiar with a certain martial art. Marion asked if what martial art could it be. Sion then showed him the book called The Longevity Meditation Method. Sion is aware that the method is not a mere beginner's book on meditation. However, one containing many advanced theories. He then said that they must not underestimate a martial art's value just because of its simplicity. Marion thinks Sion is trying to make a threat on him after he heard Sion speaking with wisdom. Sion looks up to Marion since he is the one who wrote the most detailed instructions manual about the first martial art that all members of the divine cult must learn, which was the longevity method. Even if Sion read the book, he believes that his understanding of it barely scratches the surface. Marion was too stunned to speak. Sion once again tried to be polite and asked a favor to Marion to teach him. Marion suddenly became terrified to Rionon being serious. But Marion was humble and doubts himself about what could he possibly teach Sion. Sion told Marion that he must have heard the rumors about him. Marion responded that he has heard of it, that Rionon is the weakest person in the history of the divine cult, and that he is a bully to those weaker than him while groveling at the people who stronger and drown himself in wine and women. Marion shuts his mouth when he caught himself speaking casually to Rionon. Sion acts with pride and confidence and told Marion that he wants to grow stronger. However, he is concerned about the divine cult's focus on quick mastery of martial arts. Sion again acts like a man with wisdom and says that building a foundation is more important than speed because a tree within a thin trunk breaks easily. This time, Marion wasn't terrified but touched with tears in his eyes after Sion pretends to be somewhat deep. Sion was actually trying to manipulate him and then proceeded with his final blow. Sion again tries to be edgy and said that he heard many people saying that his opinion is highly reminiscent of the orthodox sex line of thought, and that's why no one else in the divine cult accepts it. And that's why he panicked. Sion sighs that he feels awful going against the divine cult's ideals, but then he couldn't finish his sentence. When he saw Marion being in tears of joy since he felt that it was the first time someone acknowledged him, but he actually fell for his Sion's manipulative act. Sion then realized that he had gone too far. Marion finished Sion's sentence and told him out loud that because of the lack of balance in their divine volts and martial arts, Marion constructed his own theory of martial arts. However, no one acknowledged Marion. He thought that Sion carries the same idea with him. He was impressed with Sion, who understood the theory Marion dedicated into his whole life. Sinan just smiled awkwardly when he realized that he had gone too far. Sion was startled and shocked when Marion suddenly hardly bows on his knees, telling Sion that he must be punished for not recognizing Sion's potential, and he only believed in the groundless rumors. But Sion comforts Marion and told him that it was nonsense and called Marion an indispensable member of their cult. Sion then offered Marion to work with him so that their cult could improve more. Marion cried his heart out and promised Sion that he is willing to help with his whole life and thanked Sion for acknowledging him. Sion was glad that it ended better than he expected, though he didn't thought of Marion would actually cry. Sion just assumed that maybe there are a lot of things that upsets Marion. But there was actually a real reason why Sion asked Jang Marion to be his teacher. It turns out that Secretary Jang Marion is the genius in his novel, and will become the demonic tactician. With Marion, the chances of survival for Sion have increased. That night, Sion successfully recruits Marion. He was happy as he stared at his window on a cold night. He felt proud of himself since the recruitment of Jang Marion was a good start. The reason why Jang Marion was known to be the greatest genius in his novel was because after the second young master chooses him as a companion, Marion helped them by making the main character fell into a trap. And by that, Marion earned his nickname the demonic tactician. Based on Sion's novel, after the main character's rival, the second young master becomes the successor of the demonic cult. Then Marion became a significant character who plays a big role in the war against the Miram Alliance. Sion sits on his bed with fake scenarios run through his head that in terms of the three kingdoms, Liu Bei just got Zhuge Liang. Sion was proud of himself with his great scenarios. He then thinks of the next step. But he suddenly passed out and decided to just sleep since he's beat. The next day on the training grounds, Marion sweats as he was confused with the things Sion brought. Sion then told Marion that he will be now his teacher, and the materials he brought will help him with his martial arts training. Marion analyzes the scroll with Sion's diet routine, and he thought that it was very systematic and regular training, but Sion wrote it all in detail about physical fitness, and what to eat and how to rest. Marion has never seen that kind of training before. Sion again with his words of wisdom. He believes that he found a lack of systematic basic training in their divine cult, so he tried to solve the problem in various ways. Sion flexes his muscles while trying to impress Myeong, and he says that in the end we all start by eating, and their body is made according to what they eat, move, and rest. Morion was indeed impressed and thought Sion is some kind of genius. Myeong then realized that he had been holding on to martial arts for decades, but overlooked was completely filled by Sion, who he once knew a total asshole until he met him once again the other day. Sion didn't expect for Myeong to buy his bullshit words, since he only got those wisdoms he spat based on the exercise and diet he learned in gym in his modern time. Sion then told Myeong that they should proceed with the training. Sion started the training with the modern times workout routine like push-ups, back workouts, and heavy lifting, while Myeong on his side trying to motivate him. After training for 2 weeks, Sion became more buffed. And as he expected, maybe since his character is the cult leader's son, Ryeonun was born with a natural body. But his training paid off. They were still training after 2 weeks, and Sion is currently doing a laps. While Sion was jogging, Myeong writes down to document Sion's improvement. Sion looked at Myeong, and as he expected, Myeong was looking forward on changing Sion's training method to match his martial arts training. Sion was happy for his character Ryeonun that he will be stronger one day. On the other hand, outside their training grounds, a man named Sanquin, who was in a pub with Dan Pyong, was curious with Ryeonun's state. He then thought that once Ryeonun was done with his workout, then he should have crawled out of a brothel. Then Myeong came out of the training grounds, and Sanquin asked Ryeonun's whereabouts. Myeong informed his grandson that Ryeonun is busy with his trainings. Sanquin was shocked to hear that a bastard like Ryeonun is finally training. Myeong made it clear that Sion has been training for 2 weeks already. Sanquin was in disbelief, since he never saw a jackass like Ryeonun trained before, even when they went to the demonic pavilion where they learned martial arts. He believed that Ryeonun went insane. Sanquin refused to believe and assumes that Ryeonun was just trying to keep the beauty he found all to himself. But Myeong was trying to tell the truth to his grandson Sanquin and advised him to come with him so that he could see it for himself. Sanquin was speechless. Myeong battles with Sion to prove Sanquin that Ryeonun was really busy with his trainings. Myeong was worn out, but he was proud as Sion improved a lot in their currently 2 weeks training. Sion was happy that Myeong saw his improvements. Sanquin witnessed it all and still assumed that Sion is trying to pull a joke. Sion turned around and saw Sanqua being astonished. Sion analyzes Sanqua. Sanqua is a member of the Four Heavens gang. Sion kept them at a distance since they will be completely useless for Sion's survival plan. Sanqua was worried since Sion never contacted them ever since he died, but Sion responded that he was just busy with his training. And just like the others, Sanqua was terrified to see a newly developed Ryeonun and asked him if his head was really fully healed. Sion wondered how much of a jerk Ryeonun was for people to be terrified whenever he shows empathy and when he trains. Sanqua then realized that Ryeonun's expression has been completely different from before. Sanqua looked closer and asked Ryeonun if he changed to someone else. Sion didn't expect for Sanqua to really sharp, but Sion told Sanqua to get lost if he will keep talking nonsense since he's in a hurry. But Sanqua's really confused and curious about what's with Ryeonun's character development, and why would he be in a hurry. Sion explained that after he died and came back to life, he regrets his past behavior a lot. So he decided to live his life to the fullest. Sion then wants to proceed with his training with Myeong, but he felt sorry since Myeong's really old and he can't abuse his body. Sion then turns around and sees Sanqua making a face, and he also thought that Sanqua looks pretty good to be his sparring partner. Sion smirks and wanted to see if Sanqua really got what it takes. Sion held his position. Then he instantly charged his attack to Sanqua. Sanqua was confused and horrified. Sion then attacked. He swung his hand to Sanqua, but Sanqua was able to dodge the powerful attack. Sanqua stood on his feet with 0 scratched on him. Sanqua didn't thought of fighting back and yelled at Sion to stop. But Sion attacked once more to test Sanqua's ability. Sion smirks for seeing Sanqua's potential, while Sanqua on the other hand was starting to be irritated. Sanqua then decided that he will fight back, but Sion managed to block the attack. The test was over and both Sanqua and Sion ran out of breath. Sion was impressed to see Sanqua's potential, so he asked Sanqua that it must have been a long time since he fought with a trained guy. He then offered Sanqua to train with him. Sanqua was confused with the offer, and he still didn't believe that someone like Ryeonun has finally got his shit together. But Sion still favored Sanqua to train with him for a month, and Sanqua must also get his act together. But Sanqua called Sion that he's out of his mind. But Sion was persistent and made another offer. He called Sanqua to just train with him for a month. And if Sanqua agrees, Sion will give him his blue horse that Sanqua admires so much. Sanqua then turned around and changed his mind. Sion replied that he is dead serious. The next day, Sanqua did show up to train with Sion, and they start their routine by taking a lap. Sanqua looked like he's about to die from jogging. Sanqua called Rionan a bastard for making him exhausted, but Sion mocked him that he's ahead of him. But Sanqua isn't familiar with the training since he has never seen or experienced one. Muryong replied that the purpose is to improve the basic physical strength with internal organs with it. Sanqua thinks his grandfather just spat some bullshit. But Sion, who effortlessly jogs, mocked Sanqua again that he's ahead of him. Sanqua was infuriated. But then Sanqua became serious with the training when he realized that him and Rionan came from a high-ranking family, and since their childhood, they learned an advanced physical training by consuming a lot of medical potions, but they did none of such training to develop their basic physical strength. Then Sanqua became inspired by Sion, who's ahead of him, that if someone like Rionan can re-establish his basic physical strength, then the effectiveness of the advanced methods and those of medical potions will increase, and their abilities will also deepen. Muryong blows his whistle to give them a cue to stop with their training. Both Sanqua and Sion were exhausted while Sanqua is dying inside. Sion then asked Sanqua if is it all worth it since he observed Sanqua being hooked with the training. But before Sanqua even answered the question, he was called out by Muryong that he must run another lap. Sion cheered Sanqua that he is doing well. Sanqua pictures the image of the blue horse to motivate him. Muryong then showed his notes to Sion about Sanqua's score. Sion was impressed, but Muryong asked if they could apply it to ordinary warriors. Sion observed Sanqua to answer Muryong's question. He then told Muryong that it will take a month to get the answers since he experimented on Sanqua. A month later, Sanqua is still the same, who looked like he's about to die in any moment from training. Sion then asked Muryong if he collected the data they need. Muryong responded that he indeed collected the data to apply Sanqua's experience to ordinary warriors. Muryong and Sion looked worried for Sanqua's state. Sanqua then reminded Sion that it has already been a month he needed the blue horse. As a reward for Sanqua, Sion made his promise to give the blue horse to Sanqua. Sanqua was shocked with Rionan's kindness, and it made Sion startled by being yelled at. Sanqua still assumes that Rionan is possessed by an angel since Rionan was a total different person. Sion smiled to see Sanqua being sharp like his grandfather, but even if Sion told them the truth, no one would believe him. Sanqua then told Sion that he acts so strange, and he had a feeling that Sion might be looking forward on joining the competition. Sion replied like he was thinking deeply and replied that he might join. Sanqua was shocked not because he underestimates Sion, but because he's worried for Sion. Sion then told Sanqua that the matter isn't a joke since he's literally one of the candidates in line as a divine sect successor. Sanqua then shook Sion out of being worried that if the words of Rionan being serious about the competition reached his brothers, then Sion might be in danger. Sion's other brothers will come running to get rid of him. Sanqua then begs for Sion to just go back like he was before and give up their successor's position to enjoy their life. Sion was impressed by Sanqua's loyalty since Sanqua tried to warn him and seriously worried to someone like Rionan. Sanqua isn't one of the main characters that Sion wrote, but somehow, he believes that he can trust him. Sion then tries to convince him like what he did to Muryong. Sion again pretends to be bright with deep wisdom and told Sanqua that he is serious on joining the competition. Sanqua called Sion insane. Sion tries to look like an inspiring, humble man and told Sanqua that he is insane, so Sanqua must help him. Sanqua was puzzled with Sion. Sion made the same move he did to Muryong and told Sanqua that he is trying to change the absurdity of their divine demon sect that focuses everything on the eldest son. He thanked the absurdity as the younger sons. He believes that they will get along together and create things like the 4,000 losers to enjoy their life and have fun. Sion then tried to make Sanqua pictures a scenario of them having a drink with sexy ladies beside them. He then told Sanqua that the younger sons of their sect have nothing to do with their life, and that's why he dreamed of changing the absurdity. But he believes that if he wanted to make it possible, then he must join the competition of succession. Sion didn't stop with his manipulation and told Sanqua that he needs a true friend who cares about him more than anything. Sanqua was deeply astonished. Sanqua yelled at Sion that he's a freaking jerk. Sanqua, who's just like his grandfather, cried with overwhelming joy in their hearts but didn't have any idea that they were manipulated. Sanqua then agreed with Sion and told him that they must make it possible without discrimination together. Sanqua promised that he is determined to help him. Sion realized that he had gone too far again. Sion wondered why they were all gullible. He thought that maybe they were from the past, or is it because they're all fictional? He then thinks of a next plan while Sanqua's still crying his heart out. Sion again with his wisdom says a quote. He told Sanqua the old saying goes to a trustworthy friend is more valuable than 10 talented generals. Sion felt so reassured that Sanqua's by his side. Sanqua was so touched that someone finally acknowledged him. Sanqua then asked Sion if what are they gonna do next since he can't see any possibilities to win the successor's race. Sion replied that he does have a plan, but he needs Sanqua's help. Sanqua, who just recently became Sion's loyal friend, was so determined that he will definitely help Sion. Later that night, Sion stares at the recent golds he acquired and was thankful that Sanqua is a useful ally. Sion struggled at first for not being able to sell his expensive stuff, but thanks to Sanqua, who has a lot of connections, he made it possible. Sion estimated the gold he has amounted to about 10 billion won, and if it were converted into dollars, then it would be $6.9 million. Sion then called Rionan a bastard for taking advantage on his mother's side's wealth. Sion stares at the beautiful night scenery while being glad that he has the ammunitions he needs. He then proceeds to the next plan. The next day at the training grounds, Sanqua and Sion were doing their usual training routine. But this time, they were sparring with improved skills. Sanqua doesn't look like he's dying anymore, but more of a skilled warrior. Sanqua then charged his powerful kick while Sion managed to dodge it. Sion was impressed with Sanqua's new move. Sanqua jokes around with Sion to provoke him. But Sion did charge Sanqua with his attack that made Sanqua startled. Sion charged with his powerful punch. But he didn't really punch Sanqua since they're just training, but Sanqua didn't manage to dodge the punch. Sanqua then sits down for being tired and told Sion that he'll never win against him. Sion then told Sanqua to rest for a while. But Sion didn't stop and continued to train himself. Sanqua was deeply inspired. He believes that if the current Rionan he knew was with him during when they were training at the Heavenly Demonic Pavilion, Rionan will graduate as one of the best. Sion replied that he was just playing around when they were young. Sanqua tried to reminisce about the past when they were younger. Rionan was praised a lot for being a martial art genius sent from heaven. Sion had a flashback of Rionan's backstory. When Rionan was a child, he loves to train while his mother is watching him. Rionan was unbeatable back then. He always wins against his opponents by sparring. And he's conscious with his training, especially his parents were always watching him. But his parents were very supportive and never pressured him. His father always praised him by calling Rionan the divine cult martial genius. Rionan was a jolly kid with loving parents, but his world went upside down. When his mother passed, everyone cried, especially Rionan, who carries the headstone of his mother. Right from that point onward, Rionan fell into emptiness and lost all of his desire for martial arts training. Rionan did everything half-heartedly, looked for things that could be done easily, and picked on the weak, and spent his time by surrounding himself with women and booze with the other members of the Four Heavenly Gang. But after Lee Sion took over Rionan's body, the emptiness has been turned into survival, and the real Rionan came back. Back to Sion's training. He caught himself talking on his own, and it caught Sanqua's attention. Sion's finally done with his training, and Sanqua handed him a towel. Sion then asked Sanqua another favor. Sion told Sanqua that he needs to be introduced to someone. Sion whispered like the information were too confidential. Sanqua was terrified with Sion's favor and called him insane for his plan. But Sion with devilish looks was dead serious. Sanqua was speechless with Sion's bravery. It appears that Sion wanted to meet someone from the Heavenly Wolf Group. The Heavenly Wolf Group is one of the three central combat forces of the Sun and Moon Divine Cult. They were the strongest unit where the strongest members of the Divine Cult gather. And the person that Sion wants to meet is the Heavenly Wolf Group's best archer named Sa Busion. Meanwhile, in Busion's place, Busion was glad that Sanqua contacted him since it's been a long time since they've seen each other after they graduate from Heavenly Demonic Pavilion. But Busion wondered why he was summoned in such fancy inn since Sanqua doesn't know he came from a humble background. Sanqua then knocked and Busion was surprised to see an old friend. Sanqua was so happy to see him that he hugged Busion. Busion was also happy to see him since Sanqua is not just friendly but also the type of person who doesn't care about an individual's status and wealth. Busion wondered why Sanqua is in good shape since Sanqua's motto is to train in moderation. Sanqua wanted to catch up with Busion, but he instantly changed the topic since he needed to introduce someone. Busion was familiarized with the voice he heard. He then saw Rionan. Busion was horrified. Sanqua faced palms since he already predicted what was going to happen. Sion took a peek, and he saw Busion with a murderous intent. But it appears the Sion doesn't have any idea. Well, back then, when they were just training in the Heavenly Demon Academy, Rionan bullied Busion. Rionan would always beat him up, and always look down on him by dragging down his dignity, like throwing a coin at Busion. Busion was so mad with Rionan making fun of him being poor, but Rionan insults him by saying that he's just helping a beggar. He then tried to provoke him and told Busion that he doesn't have the guts to fight back since Rionan was the leader's son. Rionan told Busion to pick up the money to make Busion feel unfair. Busion did pick up the money, but he held it by clenching his fist to let out his anger. But he was comforted by a nice man. It was Sanqua who tried to cheer him up since he's also aware that no one in the academy could stand up against Rionan. Busion stood up and made a promise that when he graduates, he will make Rionan disappear out of his sight. And once he graduated from the academy, he will become a member of the serious troop of the esteemed divine demon sect, and he'll have the right to request a duel with anyone. And if that day comes, he will beat the people who did him wrong to death. While Sanqua got scared since Busion was really serious. Back to the present, Busion had his all anger out when he saw Rionan. He then told Sion that he just made his wish come true that day. But he also believes that maybe Rionan was still picking someone for his nasty trash play. Busion was so bloodthirsty while Sanqua tries his best to calm him down. Busion didn't hesitate to attack, since he always wanted to kill Rionan. But Sion kneeled down and bows his head. Busion stopped from attacking to hear out Sion. He was surprised that his biggest bully tries to be humble. His loyal friend Sanqua told him to get up. But Busion naturally didn't believe Sion and thought that his play pretend had gotten more amazing. Sion reminded Busion that kneeling down means a person has admitted their defeat. But Busion doesn't give a shit on Sion kneeling down and asked him if he has any diabolical plan. Sion understood why Busion couldn't forgive him, but he hopes Busion to listen first. Busion smirked and told Sion that he will listen. On one condition, he will listen if he can deal with Busion's triad Chusik. Sanqua was aware of Busion's overwhelming power that he even got terrified. Sanqua wonders how can Suin deal with the triad expert of the serious trope and the strongest in the divine demon sect. Sion stood up and thanked Busion, but Busion didn't hesitate to attack. But Sion immediately sensed the attack and was able to dodge it. Sion was horrified because if he got hit by Busion's overwhelming power then he will die. Busion then noticed that Sion managed to dodge him. So Busion immediately made another attack. He charged with all of his might, but Sion didn't fight back while Busion just broke the floor. Sion thinks of a plan on how he can dodge the attacks. But Busion has all of his anger bottled up and craves for Sion's death. Busion then grabbed Sion and Sion didn't got away with it. Busion was so satisfied thinking he can finally do his revenge. Busion smacked Sion's head to the ground. Sion couldn't move, while Busion's about to do his final blow with his most powerful punch that could kill Sion in an instant. Busion then punched Sion with one powerful blow. Sanqua yelled as he saw his friend being beaten up and thought he might die. Busion with no regret stares at Sion. He was appalled to see that Sion managed to block his attack using his arms. But Busion was actually impressed when he realized Rionan started training. Sion was glad he's alive and reminded Busion to give him some time. But Busion is a man of his words and professional. He stood up to give Sion a chance to talk. On the other hand, Sanqua was nervous around Busion and pleases him to listen first. But it appears that Sion actually wore a metal bracelet, and he was thankful for the sheer luck as he blocked the attack. After the fight, they all had a snack and drink to have a conversation. Sion then asked Busion that he needs his strength. The atmosphere was silent for a while, but Busion couldn't comprehend Sion. Then Sion proceeds to explain that the serious trope of divine demon sect is a unit that uses swords and spears as main weapon, but Busion is the only one who doesn't use those kind of weapon. But Busion thought of the statement the wrong way, and assumes that Sion is attempting to insult him for using a bow. But Sion seemed to forget how much Busion resents him and immediately told him that he needed the archery skills right away. Busion was offended. He became bloodthirsty again, thinking that Rionan might see him as a lowly coward for using a bow. Sanqua immediately blocked him to avoid another fight. Busion was deeply offended and told Sion that he kept spouting nonsense. Sion was terrified that he might get killed and explained himself that he didn't mean it in a bad way. Sion elaborated his intentions. Sion told Busion that in the divine demon sect that seeks for superiority, swords or other helpful arms are considered helpful. And the archers were looked down by the warriors because the way it kept its enemy in check was not superior. Sion believes that Busion's skill is needed and it could dominate the midfields. Both Busiono and Sanqua was speechless with Sion being an acknowledgeable man. Busion just walked away and told Sion that a minute had passed so their conversation was over as he promised before. But Sion didn't let Busion walk away and asked him if he plans to let his talent rot. But that moment, Busion really planned to give up. Then Sion became persistent and told loudly to Busion his plans about making the strongest archer unit of the divine demon sect that would even be more powerful than the serious trope. Sion also plans on making Busion the leader of his dream archer unit. Sion finally got Busion's attention that made him stop walking away. Busion believes that he might get screwed over again and that Sion is looking down on him. Sion then showed his boxes of gold to offer on Busion. Sion promised that he will give the golds to Busion. But Busion was offended as he remembered the way Rionan bullied him. Busion asked Sion on how far he will attempt to humiliate him. But Sion briefly explained to not misunderstand him, and he doesn't have any intention of making fun of him, but to just make his ideal archer unit. He then told Busion that out of all people he knows, the only person who has the most outstanding talent with the bow is none other than Sa Busion. And that's why Sion took the risk on meeting with Busion. With a dead serious face, he told Busion that he will become the successor of the divine demon sect. Busion was flabbergasted. Busion then told Sion that he thought that he's just a moron. But it turns out that Sion really is a mad guy. Sion agrees with Busion that he is indeed a crazy, but he would do it properly if he wanted to go that far. But Sanqua corrected him that he isn't just really crazy, but he was also a massive lunatic. Then they both had a laugh. As Busion analyzes Riona, he realized that his eyes were not the same dull eyes from the Heavenly Demon Academy. Busion saw nothing but determination. Busion then sits down to hear more information. Sion was glad that Busion changed his mind. Busion was embarrassed to be cheesy, and told Sion that he didn't change his mind because of the gold bar, but because he heard that people change as soon as they die and come back to life. But Sion piqued Busion's interest as he wonders how someone can change so much. Sion thanked Busion as he raises the drink and poured it on Busion's glass. Later on, Busion started to blush from being a bit tipsy. But no matter how hard Busion thinks, it was hard to believe for him that Rionan made such an honorable offer to him. Sion understood Busion's feelings and he apologized for being a bully back then. But Busion still doesn't trust him. Sion then asked Busion about what can he do to gain his trust. Busion then replied that he will only trust Sion if he learned to shoot an arrow from him. Sion was confused, while Busion still has doubts against Rionan. Back in the past, when Busion was training his archery, Rionan kept mocking him. They keep distracting him while he's busy with his training. As Busion shoots the arrow, he remembered his childhood with his father. Busion idolizes his father, who also does archery. Busion's father was the first archer in the divine demon sect. Bo was his father's pride and so was his. Rionan was the only person who looked down on him and insulted his bow. Back to the present, Busion wondered why Sion smiles so brightly at him. Then all of a sudden Sion acts so jolly since he was about to ask Busion to teach him archery. Sion kept smiling so bright that left Busion aghast. Sion made it clear that he is serious about getting trained. Busion didn't expect Rionan to respond that way. He was actually expecting to be insulted. Busion suddenly grabs the bottle of alcohol and chugged it all in. Sion was startled with Busion's physical response. With a frightening look, Busion finally agrees to teach Sion in depth what a bow is. Busion offered the bottle of alcohol to Sion, and they started to drink as a bond. Sanqua was terrified to both Sion and Busion for being able to drink one bottle of alcohol. But Sanqua was glad that everything ended well. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more content like this. Stay awesome, goodbye.